Alright, hello. So, last time we stopped the videos at the point where we had started to sense things and get information from it a little bit, right? And we kind of hinted that there were other things you could do with this. This was you could sense areas and objects and things like that. And so we're kind of going to go into the more advanced version of that. There's a little bit of part where I'm going to talk to you here, almost face to face, and then the rest of the time we'll be demonstrating here using my hands for reference and other objects. And I've tried making this video before, and the first part went pretty well. The second part with the demonstration, the same tripod that's being used right now was used in the first part. But it was creaking and creaking and creaking, and there's no reason for that at all. But it was loud enough that the video by and large wasn't useful. It was happening, I can't say every couple of seconds because that isn't quite accurate, but it was happening enough that I just scrapped the video. So probably be a better video second time around anyhow. Hard to say. So before we talked about how we were using a physical object like this tree, and we were interacting, getting close to it with the fields, letting our fields play into each other and things like that, right? Well, there was an old practice back in the day, back when I started. I could get my hands on some psychic books, and that was pretty much it. I mean, there really weren't any ritual books. I mean, YouTube wasn't even a fart in somebody's head, right? A long time ago, this would have been about 35, 40 years ago, almost 40, but not quite 40 years ago. So, and I'm 46. So I had to use psychic books, and so I would practice psychic exercises. I could find stuff on astral projection, and so in Horner's The Way of the Shaman, I could get my hands on that. So I would combine that, in some cases, into an astral practice, but I still kept up with this little exercise, albeit not as frequently as maybe I should have. But that's in hindsight. I didn't have a teacher or anything, so the next part I'm going to talk about is it kind of be seen in a couple different lights, right? And one of those specifically comes to mind is psychometry, right? Psychometry is basically picking things up off of objects, right? Which is not too dissimilar from clairsentience, right? So it's not really a surprise that those two practices are kind of aligned. One is more of a internal to the object, and the other's external into the environment kind of thing. Right now, those are kind of artificial, but really you're defining the focus, and it's basically the same skill set in my opinion, right? The practices might be a little different, but they can blend together over time. But with psychometry, a lot of times you would either put your hand close or onto it. They would have the obligatory, "Oh, be careful, your object isn't haunted that you're touching," and that's kind of where my interest was, right? So I was like, "Oh my God, haunted objects! Hell yeah!" Right? As long as my mom didn't find out, and so I was really interested in that. I was like, "Ooh, well." I like some old things. I used to go rummaging around in old farmhouses at a friend of mine's house who lived in the country. It's just like, well, I should probably practice this to try to make sure that whatever I bring home isn't haunted, right? So, and that was a great thought. It didn't happen a lot in practice because I didn't get out there very much. But I would still go to old places and try to find old things that looked old to me, and practice it a little bit just to see what I could pick up. So we talked last time about interacting with the fields, and really we're interacting. We're going to do this a couple different ways now, right? We're going to take it up a little bit. And instead of just interacting with the outside of it, we're going to look and try to interact with the inside of it. Okay. Now you can do this with your field, and then just sensing the changes in your field of energy. Assuming you, oh, I forgot about my incense. I hope it doesn't get too smoky in here. Okay, so you can either send your energy into it and feel, or just let it interact naturally and feel what you feel from it, right? You can do that with an object too. And that kind of relies on more of an active process, right? Because there are two types of processes that we can also use, right? And that would be an active one, where we're sending it into the object. The passive one would be to focus on the object, or to just open yourself up near the object, and then see what came to mind, right? And there are benefits to both of those. But if I have something like this tree that I'm not particularly concerned about, then I wouldn't mind so much kind of forcing my field into the tree to pick things up, right? And I say forcing, but you know, we're not trying to take the tree over, or we're not trying to subject the tree itself in any way. Though you could say that the tree is living, and you shouldn't do that, but they're usually not really going to care. Like, all right, so we had the passive and the active. So we demonstrated the active. The passive would be just like sitting here near it, and then just putting my focus on it, right? But not sending myself into it, just putting my focus on it and seeing what I picked up from it. Okay. Now, you can take those steps further also, right? I don't know what everybody who watches the video, I don't know what their experience levels are. So one of the things I first started doing, using this same process, these same techniques, right, was that I would basically send out white light into the space, but as a leveling agent, right? To just fill it with white light, not necessarily divine, not necessarily pure, just as a neutral. And I would neutralize most of the space, you know, and I would define it within my ritual space. So here, this room is, I think it's 11 or 12 by 13, and so I would do that for this room, or I would do it just for this little space here, or I could do it for my entire yard. I used to do it for the entire backyard in Hawaii, because it was easier just to think of the fence as the enclosed area than just that slab of the porch that I was using. Just like I can use walls and windows here, right? So it would make sense. You're kind of doing the same thing when you're casting a circle, right? Now, there are several ways to cast circles, and people do them differently, and they can have different outcomes, right? What we're referring to here is a balancing within that space of the circle, right? Some people balance it elementally. Some people just balance it using similar to a white light method, right? And so they just banish and let the things stay where they are right there. Another way to level the area, right? Some people just do what I do, because I learned it from a book. It's probably one of the few New Age books and practices that I thought, you know, that might actually work. And there's some fake it till you make it, but once you make it, then it becomes pretty clear what you're doing. So we were talking about leveling the area, and then I would use a similar process to the active process with this tree, right? Except I would send it out like a sonar. You can think of it like a sonar or a radar. I would literally send my intention out, you know, to either 360 all at once, or I might just do part of it and circle around like you see on the radar blips for like aircraft controllers and things like that, right? It's a really valid way of looking at it, and part of the reason why balancing that area is important is because if they're already staying there, you're not going to know, right? You need to, or if they come in, how are you going to know if there's a change, right? So until you know the space that you're in, right? Till you can sense that area, then it's a good idea to level it, right? Because then when something comes into that space, you should be able to feel the difference, right? And you may not know what that difference is at first, but it should become clearer with time. Because if you don't know who a spirit is, you don't know who a spirit is. But if I've been calling for Hecate or Leviathan, Santa Marta, or the nine-tailed fox, you know, and I feel something come in, well, can I then feel how big that disturbance is? Because that should give me some kind of indication, right, about the spirit. You know? So over time, little things like that can start to help clue you into what's coming into your space, and to help validate who's coming into your space. And that simple practice of sending it out and then gaining information back from it is exactly what I used to use. Right, so it's pretty useful. There are some times where you may not want to use that one, and we'll go into that here next. Right, it's a deceptively simple practice, and it does take some practice though. It's not like something you can just. Well, I mean, you may be able to, and that'll depend on your passive skill set, right? What you were kind of born in with, and what you have talents for, and things of that nature. But I would expect to take some practice. All of these things take practice. But once you do the practice and you start putting it into your practice, right, it really is quite beneficial. So we talked about the active process, and now the passive one is pretty similar to this. The difference is that you're kind of expanding your awareness a little bit, but you're not sending yourself out, which is kind of hard to explain. Um, it's kind of like you're expanding your mind, you're expanding your awareness to the area, but you're not like sending a pulse out yourself, right? It's not like the sonar approach. You can literally act it like it's the sonar approach. Um, but with the passive stuff, you're literally just feeling that area and largely just expanding your awareness to it. Um, and the reason I say expanding your awareness is because at some level we are all interconnected, and I hear most of the definitions for it and how they try to act like it's scientific, and it's not, right? Um, Science and theory and science and practice can be very different things, and I've done both, so I don't put that into my practice here at all. That's really the most you're going to hear from me say, if not for the most part, because it's also part of Taoism, right? That we're all interconnected. It's not a completely foreign concept, and I don't have to get into the pseudoscience that usually comes out. Um, so the places where I would use that passive approach, um, almost always as my first line, is when I'm going to some place like a graveyard, um, a house that doesn't quite feel right, maybe a scene of an accident. Maybe I feel a little twinge on something, and I don't want to send myself out to attract attention, because you will with the sonar, right? You can. I'm not saying you will. You can. Does it act just like a beacon, right? You're literally beaconing that area that you're referring to in yourself. But if you open yourself up passively to it, then it's much, much, much less intrusive. And then they have to notice your signature, how brightly you shine or not, right? Um, how much that your energy disturbs an area, right? Because it does, just as we can disturb the plants and stuff like that, they can disturb us, and it's not just living things, right? Things seep into stuff like stone and bone and stuff like that over time. So it's if you're in a place where you're not quite sure um, about the history, or you feel some kind of disturbance, I wouldn't beacon out to it. I would just kind of expand my awareness a little bit, and try to get a feel for what it is first. Because if you go shining a flashlight in the dark, you better have some skills in place. In a really bad place, you better have some skills before you start doing it, right? Another good use case for that is if you feel there's like something for you to do, then you can, like in an area or something like that. Like I'll do that when I go to a graveyard. I'll open myself up like that. Uh, usually, usually there's activity as soon as I get there. Not always. You know, it might not be big activity. It might just be heads poking in and things like that. You know, people coming for just a briefest amount of time to check. But um, I'm not necessarily going to start beaconing myself out unless I want that kind of attention. And when I first started in all this, I didn't want that kind of attention. So keep that in mind. Now, if it's your space, then you should be prepared to defend your space, or at least call in defense to help you defend your space. And that's a different thing. That's why we're saying here, if you're doing this in your house, your ritual space, you know, the active process isn't going to hurt, and you can use the passive one, say when you're on a bus or traveling or something like that, because it should be a passive process, and it might take some getting used to. I don't recommend driving with your eyes closed. I've heard bad things happen. So maybe public transportation or sitting down on a park bench. The more your reputation travels in the spirit world or with certain types of classes of spirits, the more attention you're going to attract. And so you're at some point you're going to attract attention of some things that come in. They just want to look. Sensing them out passively, maybe they don't want to interact. Then it's probably a good idea not to force them to, right? So there are good use cases for both of those, and being able to do one is not necessarily the same as being able to do the other, right? It's not quite like spirits that know how to harm and know how to heal, because they may heal one way and harm a different one, or they may not. But you should probably practice both. Is what I'm getting. That's probably enough with the theory portion of it. I mean, I'll have eventual blog posts, and I'll be codifying a lot of this into an actual structured program at some point that can be done, and it'll be a program of work. I mean, it doesn't take hours and hours a day. That would be foolish, right? But it does take work, because it's a lot like exercise, and you got to practice it to get the results you want, and then to become more efficient at getting the results that you want, just like magic. So we're going to go ahead, and I'm going to turn this off. We're going to go ahead and start part 2 here. I'll put it to my chest, because last time that tripod was just not cooperating.